Hey there, this is Taylor Gerke, Head of Events at Intrigue Media. Earlier this year, we launched Intrigue Events, our live programming that turns our newsletter insights into vibrant experiences where professionals can connect, hear exclusive insights, and engage in dynamic discussions. All with that dash of humor you've come to love in our weekday newsletter, International Intrigue. Our goal is to make global affairs more accessible and easy to understand through our dynamic programming for the curious mind. Recently, we brought our journalism to life with our live event, How Internet Culture Shapes Our World, exploring how AI, viral content, and deepfakes shape political discourse and public opinion. In this recording of the program, you'll hear our speakers share expert insights on what's next for AI, memes, deepfakes, and virality. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoy.
Before I introduce the ambassador, I just want to mention the co-founders of International Intrigue, John Fowler and Helen Jane, who are with us tonight, and I think they're off to the side. You probably can't see them, but I know them well from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Canberra, where they've been faces I've seen around the department for many years, and it's a real privilege to be able to work with them together in this different forum here in Washington, DC. Now I'd like to introduce Australia's ambassador to the United States, Dr. Kevin Rudd.
First law of Australia is always protect your booze. It's the second and third law as well. Well, welcome to Australia. How many of you are here for the first time in this building? Good, nice to have you here. You're welcome guests. So I hope you have a good time this evening. Oz Talks is a good series. Ian's doing a great job as our Director of Strategic Communications. Because we have this marvellous atrium and we're close to the centre of Washington DC, we're trying to use the embassy increasingly to host public events which are directly relevant to the body politic and the critical debates of the time. So our doors will be always open for this sort of activity. And it's good to have both John and Helen with us as well. They used to be diplomats, now they've got a real job. I began life as an Australian diplomat as well, back in the Mesolithic period. I was sitting next to this guy over here, he said, "Is that you in the picture?" And I said "Yeah, the colour one looks better." And he wasn't so sure. But since then I have worked in obviously diplomacy, worked in our embassy in Beijing. I'm a China guy in terms of my disciplinary background. I speak Mandarin and work on US-China relations and China domestic politics and economy. And I've been in Australian politics. I ended up as Australian Prime Minister. I was Foreign Minister. I run a think tank in New York called the Asia Society. And now I'm Ambassador here in Washington in my most recent career demotion. Most of you guys do this in your career trajectories. I'm doing that. And so my next job will be back where I started as First Secretary in our embassy in Beijing. We're here tonight because I think all of us are deeply animated by the question of how do we preserve and protect our precious democracies. This is easier to say, and it's very hard to do for a whole series of reasons. It's worth just standing back for a moment and just reflecting that in the history of humankind, democracy is a very recent innovation. We've only really had effective functioning democracies with a universal franchise of women and men and without any property qualification for about 100 years. And if you look at the history of humankind, and since we've begun to establish written records in 4,000 years of written history, it's 100 years whereby this thing called democracy has been innovated, developed, accepted as the norm but not even in half the peoples of the world. And so my proposition to you all, as we begin to look at international intrigue and the challenges to our democratic project, is to be very mindful of how fragile this beast is, how recent it is as a flower blooming in the garden, and how fragile it is as well in its need for continued nurture and watering. Because it is not just its intrinsic challenges, which are internal to our own systems and our own cultures and our own countries in the democratic world. There are external forces as well who would happily seek to subvert the democratic experiment in the world and snuff it out. I'm a student of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party, in its 100-year history, has an established worldview which says that liberal democracy is false democracy and will ultimately be destroyed by a form of democratic centralism alive within Marxism-Leninism as representing the optimum representation of the interests of the peoples of the world. It's a worldview I do not share. But when you have the world's second largest economy and the world's second largest and sometimes measured as largest military, with a radically different worldview on this essential question, the future of the democratic project, we are therefore dealing with a subject which is not just a matter for our own internal seminars within the democracies, it's under fundamental external challenge as well. And not just from those countries, but where democracy is now up for debate and up for grabs elsewhere in the world as well. So within that frame, it's a pleasure to host you this evening with International Intrigue, a new media company co-founded by these two very savvy former Australian diplomats, one now living in DC and one now living in Boston from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The information revolution over the past 30 years or so has left no industry untouched, and the media is, of course, occupies central space in that. And the media is the intersection point in all of our political discourse. In my lifetime, I've seen news evolve from print, through television, or through radio, through television, and then to cable, then to specialised television, to individualised media markets, through to the entire social media revolution. When I was a candidate for the Prime Ministership of Australia 15 or so years ago, I remember appointing my son as our first coordinator of social media. As an 18-year-old, he was the only bugger who understood. And as a consequence, we smashed the other mob in that election because my 18-year-old knew what the hell he was doing. But it was the first Twitter campaign of any of the democracies. And that's only 15 years or so ago. And the impact, therefore, of social media platforms and the way in which our democracies conduct their business here in the United States and across the democratic world has been profound since that time. Of course, with the traditional news media platforms, so much of what we consumed as news was determined by editors. Now we are all our own editors, and that's the essential nature of the challenge and the opportunity we face. Enter also powerful algorithms that determine more and more which ideas we're exposed to with what frequency and how they're curated for us. Of course, the aim of these algorithms is to keep people clicking and coming back to the platforms that the advertisers or the ideological or political proponents of said platform and said news platforms wishes to return to. It's undeniable that the power of these sprawling algorithms has led to social misperceptions and the spread of misinformation. Memes that didn't really exist when I entered Parliament back in 1997 are now a legitimate and powerful form of political communication. One viral meme can make or break an individual politician's career or career prospects. If we look now at deepfakes over recent years, the deception, that is the blurring of reality with non-reality, becomes even harder to tell. Using cutting-edge AI-reliant technology, deepfakes undermine what we all used to consider as a commonly held standard of evidence, that is, that which we see. Now we can no longer depend reliably on that which we see, or for that matter, that which we hear. And if you speak to those who are engaged in the business, they will say that in fact the faking of audio is now at a level which exceeds video and will soon have video converge with what audio can already do. We also see the hybridization of human bodies and faces. And so as you consume news, you now have to pause and ask yourself, is it real? And at the other end of the spectrum are cheap fakes, not deep fakes, which use AV, sleight of hand, and simple traditional techniques such as speeding, slowing, cutting, and restaging to change the way in which we interpret events. This type of manipulation is cheaper than the other. And of course, all these forms of disinformation, either deep fakes or cheap fakes, and any other form of fakery, cuts to the heart of the information exchange, which is the essential lifeblood of all of our democracies. Once upon a time, in a distant world in the past, we could assume we had a broadly common factual base on which we could then conduct different interpretations of those facts based on different values, assumptions, and reach political and policy conclusions accordingly. Now, what is at stake is whether the fact base is in fact common, shared, or even real. We are seeking to now navigate this challenge that we will face in terms of the sustainability and viability of our democracies, given the challenge represented by deepfakes, cheap fakes, and the rest. Finally, in Australia, we've sought not to be indolent on these questions. The Australian Code of Practice on Disinformation and Misinformation was first published in February 2021 by the Digital Industry Group, Inc. in Australia. It's a voluntary code aiming to provide safeguards against harms from the online spread of disinformation and misinformation. Adobe, Apple, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Redbubble, TikTok, and Twitch are all signatories to this code. And last month, the Australian government introduced legislation into the Australian Parliament to create a new criminal offence to ban the sharing of non-consensual, deepfake, sexually explicit material. The Criminal Code Amendment Bill, Deepfake Sexual Material 2024, will impose criminal sentence penalties of up to 7 years imprisonment for those who share sexually explicit material without consent. Obviously, the reaction to this is going to be interesting, but we think it's time that the legislatures intervene, given, frankly, the assault on people's privacy, and in particular women, across all of our democracies, including women who are political leaders. It's just, frankly, not on. So we are beginning, in terms of the country, to look at industry codes, legislative action, but frankly, the purpose of our dialogue this evening is to look at and explore where next we can go. We want to get the balance right. Every democracy does. We cannot simply say that the wonderful world of technology, high technology and artificial intelligence, and for that matter, generative AI, is some naturally self-regulating market. It's not. The function of governments representing the people is to define what the rules of the market should be. And frankly, getting the balance right between under-regulation, over-regulation, as opposed to non-regulation, is the way to go. There is no magic in the landing point, but the great thing about the maturity of our democracy is that we can have a robust conversation, separate out commercial self-interest from, in fact, the public interest, understand where the medium point might lie. And this is a complex and mature conversation which democracies need to have, and which, in fact, we are having, which is why we're bringing together this gathering as part of AusTalks this evening. To conclude, I'd like to conclude where I began, which is this is a fragile business, preserving our democratic discourse. And many people are feeling anxious about it and feeling anxious about it given the presidential elections, which will be held here on the 5th of November. Anxious about it in the number of countries which are conducting their own democratic ballots right across the democratic world, in Asia, in Europe, in Latin America and Africa in the year ahead. So therefore, the integrity not just of the physical voting process, though that is important, but the integrity of the information exchange which leads up to people casting a democratic ballot is equally important. Therefore, getting the balance right in the discussion we're proposing to have here this evening is fundamental. So welcome to Australia. Thank you and welcome again to our event.
The next section is focused on industry's perspective of deepfakes and digital deception. And so for the next segment, we're going to dig into this topic and joined on the stage by one of Washingtonians' 2021 and 2022 most influential people for national security and defense, Ginny Badanes. Please welcome Ginny to the stage.
Hi, Ginny.
So Ginny, you were, at the pointy end of this in Microsoft. You were working in Democracy Forward and dealing with this on the daily. In your opinion, what are some of the most significant challenges that you've seen posed by AI deepfakes in political campaigns and elections? We know it's been a big year, so we'd welcome any live examples in terms of testing where things are at.
Yeah, so we're halfway through this global election cycle, right? I'm sure many of you have read quite a few articles about 2 billion, 4 billion, depends which article you read, which populations they count, of people who will be going to the polls to vote, and we're now at the halfway point. In some ways, we're a little bit beyond the halfway point when it comes to the actual number of elections. So the US election is the biggest one remaining, not to say it's the only one remaining, but of course it's important. So it's a good opportunity, as was being discussed earlier on the first panel, to look back and say, well, what have we seen so far? Have we really truly seen this as the AI elections, as many articles have said that it is? And I think that the consensus at this point is, yeah, that dog really hasn't barked yet, right? We haven't really seen the use of generative AI to completely sway opinions or to drastically change the information environment. But the area that we at our tech company, and I think other tech companies and those who are on the pointy end of the stick, the way that we are looking at this is, yeah, but it does take maybe just one really good deep fake timed really well towards a particular population to actually have that effect. And so I would think that you all would want those of us who are doing this work to kind of stay paranoid, to stay vigilant, to be continuing to see things around corners and try and anticipate particularly what we think adversaries will do. We haven't really seen, while we've seen a lot of domestic use of AI and we don't always know the original source of a lot of deepfakes, we have not seen sort of the key nation states really weigh in yet in a lot of these elections, but I don't think that we should expect that they're going to sit this one out in the US. And just one sort of point, and I'm happy to go into details or get into other examples, but one point that I make a lot is when I get asked, well, what is the best proxy election so far for the US? Was it the EU? Was it the UK? What's the best one to look at? And I think the best proxy is actually the Olympics, not another election. Because what you see happening with the Olympics is it's a point in time that's been known. There is a clear adversary who is not pleased with the Olympic Committee, and that would be Russia, who is watching and has made a plan and has started executing it over time. They've produced a couple of Netflix-style documentaries that have Tom Cruise as the narrator. Tom Cruise did not narrate these documentaries, but they're actually quite convincing. And this goes to the point that Ambassador Rudd made, which is audio deepfakes are really convincing and people can really pull that off without a lot of access to high-level technology. And so if you're looking for sort of, well, where have we really seen AI impact elections? You probably haven't seen a lot of really great examples yet, but the Olympics are one that I would point to and say we should be wary because that's where we really see nation-state adversaries using this technology to try and change opinions.
And here I was worried that the biggest threat to the Olympics was going to be the Parisians who were pooing in the sand. So, you never know. That's still yet to come. Now, tonight, I actually tasked you all with the quiz at the start. Now, hands up anyone who's done the quiz, just a show of hands. Okay, hands up anyone who actually got all 15 of them correct. Wow. None of them or no one did it?
27%.
Thank you, Neil. Excellent. Good start. Okay, so obviously that, disappointed. I'll get you guys to do that as homework later on. But I mean, Ginny, it becomes increasingly difficult for us all to discern, the quality of AI-generated versus real images. What strategies has Microsoft or others in the tech industry been implementing to identify and mitigate deepfakes in political contexts in particular?
So you used to look at these AI-generated images and there were cues that you were taught to look for, right? It's look for the guy with the extra arm or the extra finger was really likely. The shiny images on the face. Look for words that don't spell correctly, right? They look like they're real words and you look closer and you realize they're not. And some of those cues still exist depending on the tech you're using, but the reality is the tech has gotten so good that you don't really see those anymore. And that's the purpose of quizzes like that. It's a little bit of a recalibration that, like, yes, for a couple of years there, we all got used to being able to detect this, but it's a reminder that we're really not at that stage anymore. We've gotten to an advanced place where you can't really trust that. And so it leads to some obvious questions people ask, like, well, can't we just use AI to detect AI? Like, can't we just have some amazing detector where you take an image and you put it in and you get a score? Well, I'll give you an example where that would not work well. I think we're all familiar with some of the images that came out after the assassination attempt on President Trump. And there was one image, and again, we're all kind of in DC, so I'm sure you all know this, but there was one image in particular where there were some very serious looking agents who were escorting him off the stage. But there's a version of that that has been picked up and people believe that they're smiling. So that wasn't an entirely AI generated image, right? It was based on a real image. All they did was change the faces, and they did it pretty easily so that it looked like the agents were smiling and they're happy. And it was used to address a narrative that this was all plotted and planned by the Secret Service. In fact, it served two different narratives. We don't have to get into that as to whether it was a plotted thing in the first place or whether the Secret Service knew about it. Either way, it serviced those narratives. If you put that into an AI detection system, many of them would give you kind of a mixed answer because it was a real picture that had some AI manipulation. And so detection is an important part of what we consider sort of a defense in depth approach when you're thinking about AI generated images and videos and audio files, but it is not a silver bullet because it's never going to give you really the satisfactory answer. The other side to that is, as we get better, we industry, civil society, people who are investing in detection, as you get better at detection, the adversaries who are using this tech to deceive, they get better too. And so it's a bit of, an arms race may be a strong term to use, but it's a bit of an arms race. We get better, they get better, back and forth. And the real challenge there is you don't know where you are in that cycle. Are we at the part where we're better, or are we at the part where they're better? And so we have to be careful not to rely too much on detection. But that doesn't mean that there aren't technology solutions out there and the industry isn't doing good stuff in this space. So I would point you all to sort of the work that's being done around something called content provenance, which is not just about telling end users if an image was generated using AI, but it also is used to tell you if something is authentic, which I think is a really crucial part of this conversation. We need to be thinking about not just labeling and detecting AI-generated images, but when did something authentically come from an organization that they state is theirs? So media organizations use this and are using it more. Political campaigns can use it. We've made a tool available for free to political campaigns. So if they want to put out an image, a video, and say this is from the John Smith for Congress campaign, it has this, it's metadata, it's cryptographic. I'm happy to get into the details if you guys are interested, but it's a way of saying that this is an authentic image. Another area that tech has really moved forward is on watermarking, particularly invisible watermarking, and then labeling as well, these are all sort of things that should be used together to create an environment where we can expect more information from the images and videos that we see online.
Fantastic. I know information literacy is really, really important to keep up. I know my team always makes fun of me because I fall for the deepfakes all the time.
I fell for the Pope.
Cruise, right? Oh, I fell for the Pope too. Yeah, Balenciaga. So we know information literacy is crucial for the democratic process. We know that it's important to keep up our learnings about these issues. So what strategies do you think can be implemented to address these differences and how different age groups, for example, spanning young and old, can address these issues?
So when we do get asked what solves all of this, of course, you're not going to sit on a panel or be in a conversation where people are like, there's no silver bullet. I already said it, right? Yeah. However, I will say if you're close to one, it is actually the literacy question. And we need to be doing all of these other interventions as well. But the idea that you have a population that is just skeptical, healthy skepticism, when they encounter images and videos. If you get to a place where people know that there are other people out there who want to deceive them, and so that they think twice and they look for maybe more authoritative information, or they investigate an image more, right? That is where we get to a healthy society that will sustain propaganda attacks and that kind of thing. Taiwan's a great example, actually, where there were a lot of deepfakes that were used in the election there, including ones that were pretty convincing, of a candidate who dropped out, and then there was a deepfake of them that said they were endorsing the pro-China candidate, which, didn't seem like a logical thing for that person to do. The population did not fall for it, and in large part it's because there had been a concerted, government-led campaign, Audrey Tang, exactly, who had done a lot of work on sort of inoculating, or, depending what term you want to use, the population. So it's essential. And then to your point about generational, there are ways that you can talk to children about this that's not creepy and doesn't get into politics, right? They should be learning about the concepts of AI to begin with, not to mention media literacy. I'll say that there's some really great work that's been happening in Finland around this. They teach kids as young as kindergarten about things like the sly fox who's trying to mislead you, right? And their high school students learn about statistics and the way that you can use data to tell a story that is not actually true. And so they weave it into their curriculum. I'm not suggesting we can lift and shift, nationwide curriculum into this country, nor am I suggesting that we should, but there are lessons we can learn about how you teach at different age levels. We have a partnership with OpenAI and AARP to work with the older population around AI 101. What is it? What should I be looking out for? That's particularly important when you think about how this is going to be used in sort of the fraud, is being used in the fraud area. Elderly Americans are particularly vulnerable to that. So there's a lot that can be done at every age. There's responsibility on the tech company's side to put into place responsible gateways, right? So we have a tool, for example, that allows people with disabilities, like those who have ALS, to clone their voice. And there's a really good reason for that, right? Because they know they're going to lose their voice and they don't want to lose the ability to talk to their families in a way that sounds like them. And so that's essential, but it's also essential that we not just turn that over to the population and say, go have fun with this, because we know that people would use it for bad purposes, for nefarious purposes. So we have a responsibility. Now, the challenge is you're going to find companies that have reasons for building an incentive, or they're incentivized to build in these kind of gateways. And then you're going to have a lot of other technologies that are either open source. This is not a hit on open source, it's just harder when they don't have the ownership or the incentives to build these kind of gateways in. And then there are going to be those who are kind of operating outside of what I would consider sort of the aligned countries who think about things from that way. So that's where you have to look at where are there other intervention points. Where is there a regulatory intervention that's necessary there? And I sort of reference back to the first conversation that we had tonight about the importance of public policy and the importance of having regulatory burdens on companies and organizations who are putting out technology like that. To shift to the question about political campaigns and the post-truth society, and I don't mean to repeat myself, but this is where I do have high hopes around things like content authenticity and watermarking and labeling. Like, I think, again, going to the burden on the technology companies, it's not just those who are on the generation side, so OpenAI and those who are Anthropic, those who are creating this tech, it's also on the distribution side. If you are taking content and making it available to the public, you have an obligation to think through and be really thoughtful about how you're labeling it, how people are taking it and interpreting it. If we don't get to a place where that's sort of a consensus on what the best practices are there, and I do think we'll get there, we are not there yet. If we finally get there, then you'll find an environment where we can have more information about what we're seeing. We can train people to be looking out for different signals of authenticity and trust. And I'm an optimist that we will have an environment where we're not all post-truth, you don't believe anything. I totally understand your point, though. Trust in all institutions is going down. In government, in media, in technology companies, right? Trust is going down everywhere. It is hard when there's so much out there. And it's also why it's hard to do conversations like this, where I want to draw awareness to the challenge, but not overhype it, or not imply that like deepfakes are everywhere, you can't trust anything, because that's not the world we're in yet.
That's why you should read Intrigue and trust us. All right, thank you very much, Ginny. Please give a round of applause.
We were so excited by the caliber of our speakers, but as every day has gone on, and as I hear the first panel, it's just been incredible. So I'm Excited to welcome to stage Lacey Dickinson. She's the co-executive director of the Other 98, and she works on helping amplify messages online organically. She's worked with the DNC, the Biden and Harris campaign. So, Lacey, welcome to stage. So we talked some about how it's so important to personalize messages. You are a maker and shaker of memes and online chatter. What's the magic behind a meme? What's the magic behind communicating online?
Yeah, well, first, is this on? Can you hear me? Do you want to take? Here we go. I think I got it. So first, good evening, everyone. Very happy to be here. I think one of the biggest things with memes that is often overlooked is, first of all, how incredibly powerful memeing is. I've seen memes reach like 20 million people, a single meme, so it's incredibly powerful messaging that's relatively low lift, which is super helpful as well. I think one of the biggest things with memes that kind of gets swept under the rug that people don't want to think about is kind of like the importance of them being timely. Everybody kind of focuses on being funny or like wanting to go viral. And it's not really possible to go viral if your meme is not related to something that's happening in the moment. I think that's kind of like the most fundamental thing about a meme is it's capturing a moment for people, it's capturing enthusiasm, it's capturing their emotions about an event. So really being able to pinpoint big events and kind of deciding how you'd like to respond to those and what sort of perspective you would like to provide people with and like give them their take on how things unfolded. I think that's kind of our job as memers, really providing those perspectives so that, you know, if you're in an online argument, you can shoot out a quick meme to kind of like shut someone down or something like that, or to emphasize your point. It's kind of like an exclamation point. So I think that's kind of the big thing with memes. You know, it has to be timely. It needs to kind of latch on to something that's happening in the now. Admittedly, like, VP Harris campaign is doing incredible things with memes. I think one of the biggest things that they've been really good at is really capturing the zeitgeist and harnessing that, and just making her seem really relatable and cool, frankly. I mean, I feel like it's been such a great way to defend against GOP attacks on her and kind of like flip them around. Everything that they've criticized her for, we've made into a meme that everyone loves. Like, oh, she's a crazy cat lady with no kids. It's like, guess who else is a cat lady? Taylor Swift, okay? Who doesn't love Taylor Swift, right? Like, she's a very hopeful meme person, so.
Okay, you have to tell us, what is Brat Summer? I know it's not very like Brat Summer to describe Brat Summer, but.
Okay, so it is my understanding, okay, I actually read a think piece about this recently. I was like, I need to definitively know about Brat Summer. So Brat, you know, Charlie XCX.
Who's British.
Who's British, yes. She came out with an album called Brat. And she describes Brat as like, it's messy, you're in the club, it's complicated. You know, you're leaving at like 2 a.m., your eyeliner's smeared a little bit. Like, it's a little bit of chaos. And I think that's why they call VP Harris Brat. They were like, she is Brat. Because it's a little bit chaotic. Like, she laughs, she is authentic. She is here for us, like she is showing up in a real way. And I think fundamentally, Brat is about being authentic and showing your true self and not being afraid to get a little bit messy sometimes.
Yeah, it's incredible also how quickly they decided to latch onto it and then take it over. I mean, this kind of segues into what I'm really curious about is there's been a lot of criticisms across the aisle that political campaigns struggle to communicate, that they're stuffy, that they're stuck in the cable era, that they're stuck, right? How have political campaigns worked to, or also strategists like you, told candidates, you have to embrace this, and then get someone on board to embrace Brat Summer? I mean, I know, but just, you know, embrace it in 5 hours.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. You know, you see a lot of different approaches in politics. Some groups are really focused on like, just get our message out there, say these words, put them on a graphic, that's it, like we don't want you to change it. And I think that's a little bit less effective. I think the most creative campaigns that we're seeing right now are kind of like using memes and influencers as a way to address things that they are not able to address. So things like rumors. You can't really address rumors. Like I think like Hunter Biden is a really good example. The Biden campaign is like, we're not gonna address this, right? Like, this is painful, this is my son. And so, but you can send the memers out to be like, we will address it. We will protect Hunter at all costs. Like, and I think it's like really helpful in that way. And so there's a lot of instances where we say the things that the campaign can't say, that the politician can't say. And we can frame it in really fun ways, right? So, in ways that like they might not feel comfortable doing. So I think it's just really important to have those influencers behind you who can get a little bit more creative and take your messaging to different places.
For sure, yeah. I guess there was once an era where you would really want to be close with CNN's producer, right? But now you want Jake from, TikTok to do that work for you. How is that relationship building done? Is it, take us kind of behind the scenes of the process of identifying something, because as you say, the moment's so quick. How does that, take us through the step-by-step?
So behind the scenes, just really quickly, it's really interesting how this industry has grown really, really quickly. When you think back to 2016, particularly the Democrats, like we were kind of caught flat-footed. We didn't have a lot of infrastructure for social media, and that's something that they've really committed to building out to a point where like they're going to have a suite at the DNC for creators that's similar to like what ABC would get or something like that. So it's really cool. I think, we're also seeing like managers, like people literally manage TikTok stars. It's becoming a real industry, like television or something. So it's going in a lot of different directions. But I would say, it's just growing really. It's really, the industry has grown tremendously, and we're seeing a lot more memes, a lot more content people are engaging with. And I think it's just so important to have those different perspectives, because people are much more likely to listen to someone who they already listen to, right? So we're seeing a lot of times where it's not political people who are doing the messaging, it's somebody who's doing a get ready with me video, and they're applying their lipstick and their eyeshadow, and they're talking about like access to reproductive health and stuff like that. So it's really interesting to see how it kind of veers into different directions. Like sports people are getting into it, like sometimes they talk about basketball, once in a while they'll interview like the president. Like we've seen stuff like that on TikTok. So it's really interesting.
Right, and how much of it, is it also a two-way street? Do creators go to campaigns and say, hey, I'm really excited about this, I wanna endorse XYZ, but how can I do it and leverage my platform?
I would say it's more the campaigns identifying the creators that they feel are aligned with their messaging. You don't often see the creators going to the campaigns. I would say it's usually kind of the other way around, where they're identifying people, okay, you have 200,000 followers, they're engaged, they're active, like, let's bring them on. And largely the work is, there's a lot of instances where it's paid, there's a lot of instances where it's unpaid, and people are just doing this work because they care about our country, especially the political creators. So it's, it goes both ways kind of, but mostly they're being identified.
Yeah, and something I'm really curious about in your work is, so much of it is time-based, but we have become really obsessed as a society with data and data points, and being able to prove things based on data. This worked 3 months ago, we think this is gonna work now. A meme that worked 3 hours ago might not work now. How do you think about that in terms of reporting, in terms of measuring success?
The timeliness of the memes is really important. So something that is going viral one day, like 48 hours later, it's not going to go viral. You have a very tight window, and the algorithm actually dictates this as well. When you are posting content, the algorithm favors things that are new, that haven't been introduced to the platform before. So if you're the 150th person to post the I'm with her meme, you're not going to get 100,000 likes or shares like the first person who posted it did. And the algorithm knows this. So I think that's a really important component. When you're looking at performance and metrics, I would say it depends on the platform. It's really platform specific. But the gold standard is really like the DMs, right? Like there's a song that's like, it's going down in the DMs. It absolutely is. That's really important because it shows a very high level of engagement from users. When you're sending it to somebody in your DMs, you want their response. You want to engage with a piece of content. So shares are really high up there. That's something that we watch very closely. Likes are kind of like very low level. It doesn't take much engagement to like something. And then comments, that's huge. You can get a lot of engagement in the comments. You can boost your post significantly. It kind of like juices the algorithm a little bit when you're in the comments responding to people and giving them additional information. So the metrics that we mostly do use as far as like engagement go, absolutely like shares, likes, comments, those are the most important. And it's just, I can't emphasize enough how important it is, because like the number of likes and shares that you will get on a post when you are first to post it versus the 1,000th person to do it, it makes a huge difference in your engagement.
Yeah, it's all about speed, which is someone was saying earlier, everyone's their own editor. I think it was the ambassador. And it's so true, because also when you're going so quickly, right, it's so easy to make a little error. I'm curious, when you work on social media platforms and you advise on them, you're also kind of hostage to any changes that they make to the algorithm and the geopolitical implications of it. I mean, now TikTok is facing uncertainty in this country, but that's a mechanism to really meet users and get messages across. How do you adapt to changes in ownership with X? How do you adapt to changes in algorithmic changes and try and quickly adapt to that? How long does it take to learn how to then communicate on that platform, or are the changes sort of minuscule?
The changes are minuscule generally, but you have to just like carefully monitor everything.
So
I would
it's
say.
me, not them, okay.
Yes, it's like constant monitoring, constant looking like, it's changing a little bit. Like it seems like they're favoring comments now in the algorithm versus shares or something like that. So you definitely have to pay very close attention. It was extremely unsettling, like what happened with Twitter and X. Something that like I don't think folks have quite recovered from yet to this point. But I do think, it's still super helpful. I mean, you could go to Threads, I guess, but like, are people really on Threads? I don't know. Really, but at the end of the day, it's still tremendously helpful, despite everything going on with the ownership. So I always encourage people to continue to use it.
Lacey, thank you so much. Please give Lacey a big round of applause. Anina Lay. Our final guest is Helen Toner. It's a name that I almost can't say without saying like the full name. That's how famous she is to me. And she was former OpenAI board member, and she's currently the Director of Strategy and Foundational Research at Georgetown Center of Security and Emerging Technology. Helen Toner, welcome to the stage.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah, is it on? That's always part of the gig, huh? So, Helen, AI means a million things to a million different people. It probably means something different to me than it does to you because you're an expert and I'm not. But what does it mean in a geopolitical context?
Yeah, I think the best way to think about this is in terms of AI as part of a next industrial revolution. So people sometimes AI gets compared to a lot of things. No comparison is perfect. People sometimes compare it to electricity, and I think that's a pretty good comparison. And people then say, what we have coming is something like the Industrial Revolution, but for AI. And so I think, in a geopolitical context, one way of thinking about that is the Industrial Revolution obviously changed a lot of things domestically, economically, in terms of who was working on what, where was value coming from. It also changed, if you're a country, what is the basis of your power? So, instead of it being how many young men can you get out to the field, to, the battlefield, to, run with spears or whatever they were doing before the Industrial Revolution, it became much more about your industrial capacity. This was a huge thing over the course of the First World War and Second World War. What kind of factories did you have? Who was able to do mass production? And I think what we're starting to see with AI is the beginnings of something similar in terms of just a transition in what it means to have power. So this is why you see such huge policy moves being made around semiconductors, for example, because that's one of the things that is going to power this next generation of technology. I think we're also seeing the geopolitical importance of top-tier talent, so really skilled workers, the top engineers and scientists that are developing this technology. And I think that it both affects the sort of military power directly, but also the broader economic strength of different countries. And it's going to be, if the forecasts are to be believed, going to be increasingly determined by a country's strength in AI and kind of adjacent technologies, rather than by factors that have been more relevant in the past.
For sure, yeah, and that's where talent and workforce, which probably were words that didn't exist before the Industrial Revolution, are so important. I always laugh because the UAE has a Minister of AI, but who are really the front runners in AI research? Who are the main players on the stage?
Yeah, it definitely depends on what kind of AI, because AI is general purpose technology like electricity. You can use it for any industry, all kinds of different applications. Broadly, I think people do see kind of the US and China as two obvious leading powers, and generally the US is considered to be perhaps the dominant of the two. You also have other smaller countries playing important roles. So Canada, surprisingly strong in AI. They were really strong, especially if we're talking kind of on the basic research side, really, really strong. And then, others are gearing up, as you say, so the UAE, and I think some others in the Gulf are noticing. A strange thing with AI as well is a lot can depend on whether specific leaders are kind of true believers or not. So it seems like some of the leaders in the Gulf have really bought into kind of the promise, some would say the hype of AI. Well, I guess we'll find out if it's promise or hype. So they may potentially be, powers to watch for the future as well if they manage to kind of get ahead of this.
Yeah, for sure. And you've been in a lot of rooms where AI is being discussed, developed. What is the landscape with regulation? There's a big question, and that was mentioned earlier, you were name dropped earlier, around who is regulating AI? Is it something that will be like a G20 method, or what's going on, and then what do you see as sort of the future?
Yeah, so definitely AI is a case for the sort of common dilemma for policy of technology moving very fast and policy generally being a little bit of a slower undertaking, needing a few years sometimes. So there's definitely a bit of a lag. I think the biggest effort we've seen has been in the EU. So they have their AI Act that is just sort of coming into force now. It's, there's all these multiples. It got like agreed on and then signed off on, and then it got entered in the official journal, and then it's going to come into force in a year. It's like, it's a long process, but it's definitely happening. And that is a really comprehensive piece of legislation that is trying to cover all of AI. And so that, I think, is something that everyone is watching to see, okay, to what extent have they found good frameworks to handle it versus, Silicon Valley would tell you they're just going to stamp out all innovation forever, which, is no surprise because the EU already is already way behind on AI, would be the sort of tech company answer here, which may be true. We'll find out. So they've gone for a very, very kind of comprehensive swing. Other countries, I would say, are more nibbling around the edges. China, I think, is doing some really interesting stuff here. Of course, for China, a huge concern with AI, and particularly generative AI, is the sort of censorship, information control, social control element. So it's no surprise that they are regulating heavily from that dimension. But they're also doing interesting things around, requiring that certain information be reported to the government, which I think is a very kind of general purpose tool that lots of governments could make use of without necessarily needing to have shared aims of the Chinese Communist Party. I probably shouldn't go just country by country by country, but the UK is doing some great stuff, really interesting stuff on. Yeah, we'll just go straight through the 197 or 4, whatever. Of the UN. No, the UK is doing some really interesting stuff on building government capacity in AI, which I think is huge. So do you have actually the expertise that you need inside government to be able to figure out how to be responding to changes in the technology? They have a really well-staffed, well-funded AI Safety Institute that's doing interesting stuff there. In the US, there hasn't been that much action on the federal level except for Biden's executive order that he put out in October, which I would characterize as, folks in this room are probably familiar with how policy works. You know that an executive order is far short of a law, very limited in what they can do. But Biden's White House really sort of stretched in every direction they could to find all of the different ways that they could try and do productive things on AI, and there's some interesting stuff in that executive order as well. But yeah, I think we're very much at sort of some kind of intermediate point where governments around the world are figuring out what kind of are the options. Also, where is this technology going? Which issues do we need to get ahead of versus which issues are we already experiencing and we need to kind of start to fix them? And always with the goal of continuing to support innovation and not kind of get in the way. Though I think how different governments and jurisdictions prioritize that depends a little bit on their goals.
Yeah, I guess you wouldn't want to overregulate and then get voted out by some heavy-duty funders. There's something I'm really curious about, because you are almost like, we'll go with the Venn diagram example because those are really hot right now. You have this kind of experience in national security and AI and the overlap of such. how does AI play a part in national security, in security of nations? Is that a thought, or I mean, I know you're on the forefront of all of this, but what's shaking there?
Yeah, again, so many ways, because there can be so many things. To kind of talk about a few angles here. I mean, I know that a big one has been the subject of a lot of conversation already tonight, I think, which is the sort of disinformation, information operations side of things, which is definitely on a lot of people's minds. You also have just straight up military AI. That doesn't just mean autonomous weapons, which get a lot of the airtime. It also means AI for logistics, AI for managing HR, AI for decision support is something actually we're working on at CSET where I work. So a lot of different ways that AI can be built into military systems. Some of them very benign and clearly desirable. Others of them needing a little more care. AI for intelligence is huge. So you can look at, for example, the amount of data that the intelligence community collects, whether that's text data, audio data, certainly imagery, overhead imagery, way too much for individual human analysts to look at. And so AI is really a godsend there. And maybe one last area I'd mention, any of these we could zoom in more, but to try and keep it relatively brief, one last area I'd mention has been a little bit more the subject of conversation the last year or two, which is to what extent AI itself can pose national security threats. So this is things like, if you have increasingly sophisticated large language models, or ChatGPT and its ilk, do they provide terrorists with an easier ability to create bioweapons, for example? Or do they provide relatively unsophisticated hackers with more sort of hacking capabilities that are closer to state level? But the answer for now seems to be no. As best we can tell, the current generation of general purpose AI systems or large language models doesn't seem to give you that much help. But given that companies are pouring such enormous amounts of money and really, really smart engineers and researchers into trying to make the system smarter, I think we can anticipate that along with a lot of really beneficial, important, valuable capabilities that these systems will develop. If they do develop those beneficial capabilities, then these more concerning ones will come along too. So there is a lot of talk about things like cyber, chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear, also persuasion, and coming back to this disinformation and information operations and cybersecurity capabilities, and whether you have the models being used by a bad actor to assist in something concerning, or if you talk to folks in the field, they will also go one step more sci-fi and say the models themselves acting autonomously, potentially being given some goal and going a little bit off track and doing something bad on their own. So there's also national security angles there that I think are just starting to be talked about.
Yeah, I'm sure Kim Robinson's writing a book about it right now. That's why regulation could be so important. I'm curious, the last kind of thing that I want to ask about is, we talked right at the beginning about how this is seen as a potential almost industrial revolution 2.0. And a big part of that is workforce talent needed. A lot of tech, AI talent has been really attracted to Silicon Valley, to OpenAIs of the world, et cetera, and so forth, but it seems like there's there's government angles to it, and they have a want and a need to attract talent. Do you see that there's an ability for governments to really be movers and shakers in AI and attract the kind of talent that's needed to, A, advance it, but then also regulate it?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, and one that I think there's a few fallacies around. So I want to come back to the UK AI Safety Institute that I mentioned, that I think has been quite successful in hiring really good talent quite quickly. And I think what you see there, people often, when I talk to people in government about this, they often say, oh, well, we can't pay as much. And we just can't pay as much as industry. There's no way we can attract people. They want better salaries. But when you talk to people who are actually considering these jobs in government, the talent itself, they say, look, I don't want to, if you offer me 40K, that's going to be tough. I could make 600K in industry or whatever. But the salary matters a bit, but also it matters much more. Am I going to come in and have a functioning computer? Am I going to be able to log into my email system quickly? Am I going to have a clear job and the authority to do that job and the ability to actually do something sensible, or am I going to be stuck in bureaucratic hell, not being able to actually get something done? There's a lot of programs, seeing nods and nods. There's a lot of great programs that bring people in, bring in fellows, people with STEM PhDs or other tech experience to come and do a year in government. And I think depending on where those people land, some of them have an awful experience and some of them have a really empowering experience, and it doesn't really have much to do with salary. So I think there's a lot that we need to think about in terms of what do these roles look like? What is the experience of the role like for someone who is smart and knows their field and really wants to help? Do they just feel like they're getting ground down and ground down and ground down? Or do they feel empowered? Do they feel like they can contribute? Because I do think there's a lot of people who want to serve their country, who want to help out, who want to figure out how their talents can be useful. And they're willing to take a bit of a pay cut for that, for sure. So I think there's sometimes there can be a little bit too much of a fixation just on the pure financial aspect, as opposed to a lot of other features about what makes it difficult to work in government as a technical expert.
Awesome, Helen, my last closing question is, what should we all sort of know about AI and what's on the precipice in the next 3 to 6 months, as quickly, as short as possible?
Yeah, my go-to answer here is the experts have no idea what's going on. So if you're confused, don't be too intimidated. Any individual expert may tell you that they know what's going on, but then there will be like 5 other extremely smart, extremely thoughtful experts who will tell you something totally different. So it's a pretty rapidly moving field. Sometimes people exaggerate how rapidly moving it is, I think. Experts have not been, I'm not a technical expert myself, but the best computer scientists in the world have not been good at predicting how it will change over time. And the best computer scientists in the world disagree enormously about what it's going to look like, 3 to 6 months from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So I think, to me, to me, there's a version of that that's an empowering message, which is if you feel a little confused or a little disoriented, don't let that stop you. Like, learn more, figure out what you make of it, figure out what you want to happen, what you don't want to happen, feel empowered to have your opinions, and don't think like, oh, someone else out there really knows how this works, and if I'm confused, then that's my problem. Because I think it's only reasonable to be pretty confused and uncertain, and watching and waiting and figuring out how we can respond as the situation changes.
Well, Helen, I'm going to trust you know a thing or two because you just taught me and everyone a thing or two. So everyone, give a round of applause for Helen. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. That was obviously frightening. And some of those predictions for what lies ahead are definite food for thoughts. For those of us who work in those fields of government, media, technology, they are truly frightening. But it is comforting that, and just listening to all the speakers today, it is comforting for me anyway, to learn that we're all wrestling with the same issues and we're all in the same place. We're all trying to work it out as we go along. So it's a real comfort to hear that the experts are also in that position as well. So I'm also particularly grateful, and what we saw tonight was that we've got such smart, savvy people working on these issues. So I'm particularly grateful that we've got people like we heard from tonight working on these issues. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for International Intrigue. Thanks to all our speakers. We hope to see you back here again, but please stick around for a little while longer and continue to enjoy this venue and our company. Thank you.